You know that feeling when everyone's already judging something before it even has a chance to play out? That's kinda what's happening right now. People are throwing out grades, calling it mid, saying it didn't move the needle. But if you actually look a little deeper, there's way more going on here than what shows up on the surface. And honestly, this might end up being one of those situations where the early takes age really badly. Be sure to click the like button if you've been a fan for more than 25 years, and tell me below what year you've been a Vikings fan since. We have fans of all ages here, and that's amazing. Something about this Minnesota Vikings draft isn't adding up. And the more you dig into it, the clearer it becomes that what looks like a C-grade class on the surface might actually be one of the most misunderstood drafts in the entire 2026 NFL cycle. Because when Minnesota Vikings fans saw the reactions from major outlets, whether it was Mel Kiper Jr., ESPN, CBS Sports, or Bleacher Report, the tone was consistent. Skepticism, doubt, confusion, a class labeled as average at best. But here's where things start to get interesting. Those grades might be based on a completely different reality than the one NFL teams were actually operating in. Inside league circles, the perception of this draft board was drastically different from what the media presented. And that disconnect? It may have completely reshaped how the Vikings approached their first-round decision. Let's start with the biggest lightning rod, Cale Banks at pick 18. On paper, critics see a reach. Kiper himself had Banks ranked 62nd overall. That alone explains the C grade, because draft grades, at their core, are nothing more than reflections of where analysts personally ranked players. If a team takes someone too early compared to that list, the grade drops. Simple as that. But here's the part that changes everything. If you remove the injury history from Cale Banks's profile, and that's a massive if, no doubt, you're not talking about the 62nd best player in the draft. You're talking about a potential top 10 pick, a dominant force, a 6'6", 327-pound interior defensive lineman with the kind of burst and disruption ability that NFL teams covet at the highest level. And that's exactly what makes this selection so fascinating. Banks's left foot injury became the defining narrative of his pre-draft process. It started back in August, lingered through September with a re-injury against LSU, then escalated again with a broken bone before the Combine in February 2026. Even after testing well, he underwent surgery in March and had to reassure teams with a letter in April, confirming he'd be cleared by early June. Now think about that timeline. Multiple setbacks. Same foot. Limited college production because of it. That's the version the public saw. But internally, teams were digging deeper. Medical staffs were evaluating the nature of the injury. A clean break. Not something degenerative. Not something expected to linger long term. And according to Banks himself, several teams came away with little to no concern. So, when the Vikings stayed at 18 and made the pick, that tells you everything about their confidence level. Because if there was even a slight doubt medically, this front office likely plays it differently. Maybe they trade back. Maybe they wait. Maybe they pivot entirely. But they didn't. They trusted their evaluation. They trusted their medical staff. And they bet on upside. And here's where the conversation really flips. Because even in a floor scenario, Cale Banks projects as a plus-run defender from day one. His size, length, and natural strength alone give him a baseline that's hard to miss on. That's why comparisons start at players like Javon Kinlaw. Solid, productive, but not elite. But if everything clicks, now you're talking about a completely different tier. We're talking about the archetype of players like DeForest Buckner, a borderline Hall of Fame caliber defensive tackle, or even Chris Jones, one of the most dominant interior disruptors of this generation. That's the ceiling the Vikings are chasing. And that's why labeling this as a safe versus risky pick isn't so simple. It's only risky because of health. Strip that away, and it might actually be one of the safest bets in the class. Now, here's another layer that fans need to consider: the alternative. Mel Kiper pointed out that Minnesota passed on safety Dylan Thiemann and had multiple defensive tackles ranked higher, including Peter Woods and Caden McDonald. And yes, if the Vikings had gone in that direction, the reaction likely flips overnight. Suddenly, it's an A or B+ draft in the eyes of the media. Same roster, same players on day 2, completely different narrative. That's how fragile draft grades really are. And speaking of day 2, that's where things quietly start to swing back in Minnesota's favor. In a big way. But before we even get there, I want to hear from you. Do you think the Vikings made the right call betting on Cale Banks at 18? Or was it too big of a gamble given the injury history? Drop your grade for this pick in the comments, A, B, C, D, or F. And let's get a real conversation going. And this is where the narrative really starts to shift. Because while all the attention and criticism is centered on that first-round decision, what the Minnesota Vikings did on day 2 might end up being the true backbone of this entire draft class. 4 picks, 4 opportunities to reshape the identity of this roster. And if you look closely, there's a clear theme running through every single one of them. Physicality. Mel Kiper Jr. even acknowledged parts of it, highlighting names like Jacoby Thomas, Dominique Orange, Jake Gold, and Caleb Tieran. But what stands out isn't just the individual talent. It's how these pieces fit into a much bigger transformation that's been quietly building inside this organization. Let's start with Jake Gold, because this is one of those picks that might not get national headlines right now, but internally, this is a move that could define the defense moving forward. We're talking about a 6.4, 240-pound linebacker with elite athletic traits. The kind of player defensive coordinator Brian Flores doesn't just draft, he designs roles for. And that's the key detail. You don't invest a near top 50 pick in a player like Gold unless you have a very specific vision in mind. Flores isn't guessing here. He's planning. The question isn't if Jake Gold will play, it's how. Is he going to step into a high-impact role immediately, playing 60 to 70% of snaps as a versatile chess piece? Could he evolve into that see-ball, get-ball linebacker, blitzing relentlessly and attacking downhill like past enforcers in this system? Or is this a long-term investment? Someone who develops behind the scenes before eventually taking over a leadership role in the middle of the defense. No matter the path, one thing feels certain. He's going to be involved early. And when you pair that with what they did on the defensive line, adding Dominique Orange alongside Cale Banks, you start to see a front seven that's getting bigger, stronger, and more disruptive. But the pick that might say the most about this franchise's self-awareness? Jacoby Thomas. Because for years, there's been a quiet label attached to this team under Kevin O'Connell. A label that Vikings fans know all too well. Talented? Absolutely. Explosive offensively? No doubt, especially with weapons like Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison. But physical? That's where the doubts crept in. And that's exactly what Jacoby Thomas addresses. 5 interceptions in 2025 tell you about his playmaking ability. But it's not just about takeaways. It's about attitude. It's about presence. It's about bringing a level of intimidation to the secondary that's been missing since the prime days of Harrison Smith. Because here's the truth about NFL defenses. Something Flores understands better than most. Physicality doesn't start in the trenches. It starts in the secondary. You can have the toughest front seven in football, but if your defensive backs aren't willing to hit, to enforce, to set the tone over the middle of the field. Offenses will exploit that every single time. Jacoby Thomas changes that equation. He brings swagger. He brings edge. He brings that think twice before crossing the middle mentality that defines elite defenses. And that might be why, for many inside the building, he's viewed as one of the most important picks in this entire class. Now shift to the offensive side, and you'll see that same philosophy carry over. Caleb Tieran, 6'8", 323 pounds, isn't just depth. He's insurance. He's stability. He's a response to a very real concern along the offensive line. With Brian O'Neill getting older and Christian Darrisaw dealing with inconsistencies and injuries, the Vikings needed more than just starters. They needed reliability, and that's exactly what Tieran provides. He may not start right away, but in a league where offensive line depth can make or break a season, having multiple capable tackles ready to step in at any moment is a massive advantage. It's the same philosophy teams use at quarterback. Always be prepared. Now you've got a rotation where, even if injuries hit, you're not scrambling, you're prepared. And then there's day 3. This is where most teams lose momentum. This is where drafts fade out quietly. But not this one. Because if day 2 was about building structure, day 3 was about sharpening identity. Mel Kiper didn't think it moved the needle, but look closer. Charles Demings, 4.41 speed, 9 interceptions, 35 passes defended. That's not just production. That's a ball hawk. That's a playmaker. Dion Claiborne, explosive, dynamic, a home run hitter with legit receiving ability out of the backfield. Yes, there are concerns like ball security, but in the 6th round, that's exactly the kind of upside swing you take. And then there's Max Bredesen. This one might not show up in headlines, but it says everything about what this team is trying to become. A fullback, a tight end hybrid, a grinder. The kind of player coaches describe as first in, last out. The kind of player who doesn't just fill a role, he sets a tone. Because for the first time in a long time, the Vikings didn't just draft talent. They drafted an identity. They added players who hit, players who block, players who bring energy, toughness, and edge to a roster that, for years, has leaned heavily on finesse. And when you zoom out and look at the full picture, that's when the criticism starts to feel incomplete. Was it flashy? No. Did they reach on certain players? Maybe. But did they get tougher? Without question. And in the NFL, that shift can change everything. So now it all comes down to you. After seeing the full picture, from Cale Banks to Jacoby Thomas, from Jake Gold to Max Bredesen, do you still agree with that C grade? Or are we looking at a draft that could age a whole lot better than people expect? Drop your full grade in the comments. And if you believe this class is being underrated right now, make sure to say why. Go Vikings!